Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the United States. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The year was 1858. Deep in the rugged valleys of the Ozark Borderlands, where Missouri meets Arkansas in a tangle of ancient limestone and dense oak forest, the name Miller was spoken with hushed reverence and quiet fear. Three brothers, Ezekiel, Thomas, and Samuel Miller, had built their adjoining homesteads along the banks of what locals called Whispering Creek, a narrow meandering waterway that wound its serpentine path through Shannon County. The locals avoided their land after sunset, though few would admit why. The Miller family had arrived from Tennessee 17 years earlier, bringing with them not just their belongings, but a reputation for keeping to themselves. The brothers were known for their craftsmanship in woodworking and their uncanny ability to predict harsh winters, but beyond that, the townsfolk of nearby eminence knew little of their private affairs. What happened to the Miller brothers in the Hollow, a small, bowl-shaped valley hidden between two limestone ridges, would remain unrecorded in any official capacity until 1962, when Professor Harold Whitaker of the University of Missouri discovered a series of documents while researching pre-Civil War settlement patterns in the region. What he found would challenge his understanding of human nature and the depths to which isolation can drive men. According to county records from 1858, the Miller property was abandoned suddenly in late October of that year. The brothers' livestock was found wandering freely, their crops left unharvested. The winter came early and harsh, as if nature itself was intent on reclaiming what the Millers had built. By spring, when neighbors finally ventured onto the property, they found the cabin doors secured from the inside, with heavy furniture. No signs of struggle, no evidence of violence, just emptiness and silence. The county sheriff documented the scene with clinical detachment. Property appears vacated willingly. No sign of foul play. Brothers' whereabouts unknown. The case was effectively closed before it began. In those days, men disappeared into the wilderness with regularity. The frontier was still wild, unforgiving. People moved on, died of disease, fled debts, or simply sought new beginnings elsewhere. The Millers became just another frontier mystery, their names gradually fading from local memory. But Professor Whitaker's discovery of a weather-beaten journal, concealed in the false bottom of an old chest sold at auction in 1902, revealed a different story. The journal belonged to Samuel Miller, the youngest of the three brothers. Its pages told of mounting tension, paranoia, and a darkness that grew between the brothers like a fourth presence in their isolated hollow. The first entry, dated from August 1858, reads, "Ezekiel claims to have seen it again last night, watching from the tree line. Thomas says he's losing his mind from the solitude, but I've begun to wonder if there might be something out there. The cattle won't graze on the north pasture anymore." What follows is a reconstruction of events based on Samuel's journal, county records, fragments of correspondence found in the Eminence Courthouse archives, and the oral histories collected by Professor Whitaker between 1962 and 1968, before his unexpected death terminated his research. The university subsequently archived his findings, which remained largely forgotten until now. The Miller brothers were not the first to settle the particular tract of land that would later become notorious in local legend. The official record shows that in 1819, a trapper and frontier trader named Jeremiah Blackwood established a small outpost near what is now called Whispering Creek. Blackwood's tenure was brief and ended abruptly in the spring of 1821. According to a territorial census taker's report, Blackwood abandoned the property suddenly, leaving behind most of his possessions. When questioned in St. Louis months later, Blackwood reportedly claimed that unhealthy vapors from the nearby hollow had sickened him and killed his dog. He refused to return even to collect his abandoned goods. The land remained unoccupied until 1831, when French immigrant Marcel Devereux claimed it under a federal land grant program. Devereaux, a former fur trapper with the Missouri Company, intended to establish a trading post serving the Osage and the increasing number of settlers moving into the territory. Documents in the Missouri Historical Society indicate that Devereaux built a substantial cabin and outbuildings, but abandoned the site after just one winter. In a letter to his brother in New Orleans, dated April 1832, Devereaux wrote, "I cannot remain another season in this place. The soil itself seems to resist cultivation, and at night there are sounds from the small valley nearby that no animal or wind could make. The local Indians avoid this place entirely, and now I understand why. That ground does not welcome men." Devereaux sold the property to a land speculator for less than half its assessed value and returned to St. Louis, where he later died during the cholera epidemic of 1849. The property changed hands several times over the next decade. Remaining unoccupied, its structures gradually reclaimed by the forest. The summer of 1858 had been unusually dry in the Ozarks. Springs that had flowed reliably for decades slowed to trickles. Crops withered in the fields. The Miller brothers, like their neighbors, faced the prospect of a lean winter ahead. But unlike others who looked to community for support in hard times, the Millers turned further inward. Ezekiel, the eldest at 42, had always been the leader. A tall, gaunt man with a beard reaching to mid-chest, he managed their finances and made decisions for the family enterprise. Thomas, 3 years younger, was the physical strength of the trio. Broad-shouldered and taciturn, he spoke little but worked from dawn till dusk, without complaint. Samuel, only 34, was different from his brothers in temperament and build. Slighter, more thoughtful, he kept the records, corresponded with merchants in St. Louis, and maintained what little connection the family had with the outside world. The brothers had purchased the land in 1841, sight unseen, based on descriptions of its abundant water and fertile soil. The price was remarkably low, even for frontier property, a fact that should perhaps have raised questions. But the brothers, eager to escape the growing population of Tennessee and establish their independence, accepted the bargain without suspicion. Their father, Josiah Miller, had died in Tennessee the previous year, leaving the brothers a modest inheritance. According to court records in Knox County, Tennessee, Josiah's death had been somewhat mysterious. He was found in his workshop, apparently having collapsed while working, with no visible injuries or signs of illness. The local doctor attributed the death to failure of the heart, a common catch-all diagnosis in that era. What drove the brothers to seek such isolation in the Missouri wilderness? Samuel's earlier journal entries, dating from 1841 to 1842 and preserved separately in the Tennessee State Archives, suggest that Ezekiel in particular had become increasingly uncomfortable around others following their father's death. Ezekiel speaks often of finding a place where we need answer to no one, Samuel wrote in December 1841. He says the eyes of neighbors weigh upon him like stones. Thomas agrees with whatever Ezekiel proposes, as always. I admit some reservation about removing so completely from society, but I cannot imagine life separated from my brothers. For 17 years, they lived and worked on the property without documented incident. They built a substantial main house, a barn, and various outbuildings. They cultivated fields, raised livestock, and earned a modest income, selling handcrafted furniture and tools to settlements along the river. They were known to be insular, but not unfriendly. They paid their taxes promptly, attended church infrequently, and maintained the minimal social connections necessary for frontier survival. According to Samuel's journal, the trouble began when Ezekiel started spending nights on the porch rather than in his bed. Ezekiel claims he needs to watch the tree line, Samuel wrote on August 23, 1858. Says something's been disturbing the property. Thomas thinks it's just wolves or a mountain lion, but Ezekiel insists it's something that walks like a man, but isn't one. Drought had gripped the region since early July. The creek had narrowed to a trickle, and the spring in the hollow, which had never failed in their 17 years on the property, had dried up completely. The brothers had been forced to haul water from a more distant source, adding hours of labor to their already demanding days. "The drought wears on us all," Samuel wrote on August 27th. "Thomas is short-tempered, his hands cracked and bleeding from the dry air. Ezekiel barely speaks except to mutter about watching the tree line. I find myself startling at small sounds, my nerves frayed like old rope. Last night I dreamed of rain so vivid I could smell the wet earth. I woke to find my pillow dry as bone and the air thick with dust." By September, Ezekiel had constructed a series of strange markers around the property, bundles of twigs bound with strips of leather and hung from trees at irregular intervals. When questioned, he would only say they were for protection. Thomas initially mocked these efforts, but soon grew concerned about his older brother's deteriorating mental state. On September 5th, Samuel recorded, "Thomas confided that he's worried about Ezekiel's mind. Said he found him at dawn standing in the dry creek bed, listening to the ground with his ear pressed to the earth. When Thomas asked what he was doing, Ezekiel reportedly said, 'They're moving again, coming closer.' Thomas asked who, but Ezekiel would not elaborate. A neighbor, Jacob Thornton, reported visiting the Miller property in mid-September to discuss a land boundary issue. His statement, recorded years later by Professor Whitaker, describes an unsettling scene. The eldest Miller had dug a trench around the main house, about knee-deep. When I asked what it was for, he just stared at me and said, 'What's in the ground needs to stay there.' The other brothers seemed embarrassed but didn't contradict him. I finished my business quickly and left. Something felt wrong about the place." Samuel's journal entries grow increasingly troubled through September. He notes Ezekiel's insistence that the soil in the hollow had gone sour and that something was coming up through it. More disturbing is Samuel's observation that Thomas, previously skeptical, had begun to support Ezekiel's claims. "Thomas says he heard whispering from the root cellar last night," reads an entry from September 29th. "Says it sounded like our father's voice, which is impossible. Father died in Tennessee 15 years ago. The root cellar becomes a recurring focus in Samuel's writings. The brothers had dug it beneath the main house shortly after settling the property. A simple earth chamber reinforced with timber, it served to store vegetables and preserves through winter. Now, according to Samuel, his brothers refused to enter it. Thomas nailed the cellar door shut today," he wrote on October 3rd. "Said nothing good would come from opening it again." On October 5th, Samuel describes a troubling incident, awakened past midnight by Ezekiel shouting. Found him and Thomas in the kitchen, Ezekiel raving about something coming through, Thomas trying to calm him. The floor around the cellar door was wet, though we've had no rain. A dark moisture seeping up between the boards. Ezekiel insisted it wasn't water but the hollow reaching out. Thomas and I mopped it up, found it was indeed only water, likely from some underground seep given the drought. But Ezekiel would not be convinced. He sat watching the floor until dawn. A week later, Samuel describes finding Ezekiel standing motionless in the field before dawn, facing the sunrise. When I approached, he didn't acknowledge me, just kept whispering something I couldn't make out. When I touched his shoulder, he turned with such a look in his eyes, like he didn't recognize me. Then he smiled and said, "We've been waiting too long, Samuel. It's time to recognize what we have here." The next day's entry is brief. Thomas and Ezekiel spent the day in the hollow. They won't tell me what they were doing there. When they returned at dusk, their clothes were caked with clay and something darker. They burned the garments immediately. The hollow referenced was a small enclosed valley about half a mile from the main house. According to land survey records, it contained a natural spring that had reportedly dried up that summer. Local oral history collected by Professor Whitaker suggests the indigenous Osage people had avoided the hollow even before European settlement, though no one could articulate exactly why. An 1820 survey of the region found in territorial archives makes brief mention of the hollow. The surveyor noted, "Depression of unusual symmetry, approx. 50 yards across, ringed by limestone formations. Native guide refused to enter, claiming ground was thin in that place. Compass readings erratic within the depression." On October 11th, Samuel wrote, "I went to the hollow today, curious about what has so captivated my brothers. The drought has transformed it. The spring is completely dry, the soil cracked and gray. Standing in the center, I experienced a curious sensation, as if the ground beneath was not solid, but somehow hollow, reverberating with my footsteps. More disturbing were the marks I found. Someone has carved symbols into the limestone rocks that ring the depression. Crude circles, one inside another, with strange angular marks between them. The work appears fresh. On October 13th, confronted Ezekiel about the carvings in the hollow. He denied responsibility, but seemed pleased that I had seen them. Said they were already there, just waiting to be uncovered. When I pressed him, he said, "The hollow is older than we are, Samuel. Older than anyone. It has its own needs." Thomas nodded at this as if it made perfect sense. I'm increasingly concerned about their state of mind. On October 15th, Samuel writes of waking to find both brothers missing from the house. He tracked them to the hollow, where he discovered them digging. "They've excavated a pit about 8 feet deep," he recorded. When I asked what they were looking for, Thomas said simply, "We're not looking for anything. We're making room." Ezekiel smiled at this in a way that chilled me. The pit would become the brothers' obsession over the next days. Samuel describes their work continuing from dawn until dusk, with Thomas doing most of the physical labor while Ezekiel directed. "They've reached about 12 feet now," he wrote on October 17th. "The walls of their excavation are shored with timber taken from our woodpile." When I asked again what purpose this served, Ezekiel said, "You'll understand when it arrives." When I asked what was arriving, he looked at me with an expression I've never seen before, pity mixed with something like hunger. Samuel's account suggests he began to fear his brothers in the days that followed. He describes barricading his bedroom door at night and keeping a loaded rifle nearby. "The whispering is no longer confined to the root cellar," he wrote on October 18th. "I hear it in the walls now, between the logs. It's like dozens of voices having separate conversations, too quiet to make out the words." On October 19th, Samuel describes an alarming encounter with Thomas. "Found him standing in the doorway of my room before dawn, just standing there watching me sleep. When I startled awake and asked what he wanted, he said, 'It knows your name now, Samuel.' When I demanded explanation, he simply walked away." The entry for October 20th reads, "Ezekiel has stopped eating. Says he's being fed elsewhere." His physical appearance has begun to change. His skin seems looser somehow, his eyes sunken deeper. Thomas follows him everywhere now, like a shadow. They spend hours in whispered conversation that stops whenever I approach. The final dated entry in Samuel's journal, October 21st, 1858, reads, "Thomas took all our preserved meat to the hollow today. Says we need to prepare for the arrival." Ezekiel hasn't slept in 3 days. He sits at the kitchen table drawing the same pattern over and over, concentric circles with strange markings between them. When I asked him to explain, he said, "The soil remembers what was planted in it, Samuel. And now it's harvest time. I've decided I must leave tomorrow. Whatever madness has taken my brothers, I want no part of it, but Samuel never left. At least there is no record of him ever being seen in Eminence or any surrounding settlement. Whatever happened after October 21st remains unwritten. A fragment of paper, discovered by Professor Whitaker, tucked between the final pages of the journal, contains what appears to be the beginning of another entry. Undated. They've sealed the house. Thomas has taken my boots. They say we must all go to the hollow tonight. Ezekiel says what's buried there is finally The text ends abruptly, as if the writer was interrupted. When neighbors finally investigated the abandoned property the following spring, they found the house intact but empty of inhabitants. The doors had been barricaded from within, windows shuttered. Food still sat on the table, apparently untouched for months. The root cellar door remained nailed shut. No one, according to courthouse records, ventured to check the hollow. One of the men who investigated the property, a farmer named Elias Green, later told his son a story that wasn't included in official reports. The son, Joshua Green, shared this account with Professor Whitaker in 1964. "My father said when they entered the Miller house, everything was covered in a fine gray dust, not like normal dust, but more like ash or clay. The strangest thing was a wooden box they found on the kitchen table. It was carved from a single piece of oak, with circular patterns covering every surface. Inside was nothing but soil. My father said the other men wanted to take it, thinking it might contain hidden money, but he persuaded them to leave it. Said it felt wrong to touch it. Later that night, he dreamed of the Miller brothers standing at the foot of his bed, their eyes black as pitch, their mouths moving in unison but making no sound. After that, he refused to discuss the matter further. The property passed to the county after 7 years, without tax payment. It was sold at auction in 1866 to a cattle rancher named William Burnett, who reportedly never lived on the land but used it for grazing. In 1873, Burnett's entire herd was found dead on the property, clustered around the hollow. No cause was determined, though local speculation ranged from poisonous plants to bad water. A local newspaper, the Eminence Courier, carried a brief item about the incident. Mr. Burnett's cattle, numbering 47 head, were discovered deceased on Tuesday last, arranged in a most peculiar manner around the depression known locally as Miller's Hollow. Veterinary examination revealed no obvious cause of death. The animals showed no signs of struggle or distress. Mr. Burnett has declared his intention to sell the property forthwith. A follow-up article published 2 weeks later included additional details from the veterinarian who examined the cattle. Dr. James Wilson reports that the deceased animals exhibited unusual post-mortem characteristics, including a complete absence of blood and a gray discoloration of all internal organs. Dr. Wilson confesses himself unable to attribute these conditions to any known disease or poison. Burnett sold the property at a significant loss to a timber speculator from St. Louis who intended to harvest the valuable hardwoods on the land. According to county records, the logging operation was abandoned after less than a month. No official reason was given, but local rumors suggested that workers refused to remain on the property after dark, claiming to hear strange sounds from the hollow and seeing unexplained lights among the trees. The land changed hands several more times over the decades, but no one lived there for any length of time. By the early 1900s, local folklore had established the Miller property as cursed ground. Children dared each other to spend nights there. None ever completed the challenge. In 1912, a hunter named Frederick Morley became lost in the area during a snowstorm. He took shelter in the remains of the Miller house, by then largely reclaimed by nature. In a letter to his brother, written after his rescue, Morley described a disturbing experience. The snow had drifted against the walls, nearly burying the structure. I managed to clear enough space to enter and found the interior remarkably preserved, as if time had somehow moved more slowly within. As night fell and the temperature dropped, I began to hear what sounded like voices beneath the floorboards, not distinct words, but the unmistakable cadence of human speech. I told myself it was merely the wind, but then I noticed something even more troubling. Though the storm raged outside, depositing nearly 2 feet of snow, none accumulated within a perfect circle around the nearby hollow. It remained as bare and dark as a summer day. Morley concluded his letter with a detail that he admitted strains credibility, yet I swear upon our father's grave it is true. As dawn broke and I prepared to leave, I noticed 3 sets of footprints in the snow, leading from the house to the hollow. They had not been there when I sought shelter the previous evening, and no one had passed the house during the night. The unbroken snow surrounding the property testified to that. More disturbing still, the tracks showed feet of different sizes, corresponding to 3 different men, and the depressions were perfect, as if the men who made them carried no weight at all. During the Depression years, a transient worker reportedly took up residence in the ruins of the Miller property. According to local accounts, the man, who identified himself only as Jack, lived there for several months in 1934 before disappearing. A farm family who had occasionally provided him with odd jobs reported that in his final weeks, Jack became increasingly paranoid, claiming that something in the ground was trying to speak to him. He was last seen walking toward the hollow with a shovel over his shoulder. His possessions, including a small bundle of clothes and a battered Bible, were found neatly arranged beside the dried-up spring. The Bible, currently held in the Eminence Historical Society, contains a handwritten note on the final page. They're not dead, not alive either. Something else. I hear them at night, getting closer. The handwriting becomes increasingly erratic toward the end of the message. In 1937, a hunting party reported finding unusual stone arrangements in the hollow. 3 rough circles of limestone, each approximately 6 feet in diameter. When they returned with the sheriff to investigate further, no stones were found. The hunters insisted the formations had been there, too deliberate to be natural, too heavy to be easily moved. The sheriff's report notes, the men seemed genuinely confused by the absence of the stones they described. 2 of them became quite agitated, insisting we were in the wrong location despite clear landmarks indicating otherwise. Of particular note was their description of the soil within these alleged stone circles. They claimed it was disturbed, as if recently dug. Oh boy! Yet the ground showed no such evidence upon inspection. One of the hunters, Vernon Taylor, later told his pastor that he had seen something else in the hollow, something he hadn't shared with the others. According to church records preserved in the Eminence Baptist Church archives, Taylor confessed that he had seen 3 men standing at the center of the hollow, backs turned, heads bowed as if in prayer. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and their feet didn't quite touch the ground. Taylor attributed the vision to exhaustion and the poor light of dusk, but he never hunted in the area again. During World War II, the property was briefly considered for use as a training ground by the U.S. Army. A preliminary survey was conducted in 1943, but the site was ultimately rejected. The survey report, obtained by Professor Whitaker through a Freedom of Information request, cites unsuitable terrain features and persistent equipment malfunctions as reasons for the rejection. An addendum to the report, marked confidential, mentions unusual acoustic anomalies in the vicinity of the geological depression designated Area C and recommends no further exploration of subterranean features without specialized equipment. In 1952, a graduate student in geology from the University of Missouri conducted soil samples in the hollow as part of a regional study. His findings, published in an obscure academic journal, noted that the soil composition in the hollow was markedly different from surrounding areas, with unusually high concentrations of iron oxide and an unidentified organic compound. More intriguing was his observation that despite the hollow's bowl-like shape, it showed none of the expected water accumulation patterns, suggesting some form of underground drainage. The student attempted to map these drainage patterns, but reported that his equipment behaved erratically within the hollow. Professor Whitaker's interest in the case began in 1962, when he discovered Samuel's journal in the university archives, misclassified among agricultural records. His notes indicate growing obsession with the case, particularly after his first visit to the hollow in the summer of 1963. There is something unnatural about the acoustics of this place, he wrote. Sounds seem to both carry too far and be muffled simultaneously. My assistant reported hearing whispers behind him when no one was there. Whitaker's field notes describe the hollow as a near-perfect bowl formation, approximately 50 yards in diameter, ringed by limestone outcroppings that resemble crude seats or altars. He noted the unusual absence of vegetation in the center of the depression and the fact that standing water, even after heavy rain, disappeared from the surface within hours, suggesting some kind of underground drainage system or highly porous soil. In his private journal, which was not discovered until after his disappearance, Whitaker wrote more candidly about his experiences in the hollow. I am not a superstitious man. I have dedicated my life to the rational pursuit of historical truth. But I cannot deny that this place affects me in ways I cannot explain through conventional means. Standing in the center of the hollow, I feel watched, not from the surrounding forest, but from below. The sensation is so vivid that several times I have jumped aside, convinced that something was about to break through the ground beneath my feet. Most intriguing was Whitaker's discovery of fragments of pottery unlike any documented. Osage or European settler artifacts, shards of a dark, unusually dense ceramic material bearing incised patterns similar to those described in Samuel Miller's journal. Carbon dating performed on organic material adhering to these fragments suggested they predated European settlement by several centuries at least. Whitaker became convinced that the hollow contained archaeological significance predating the Millers, possibly even predating indigenous settlement. His funding requests to the university repeatedly emphasized the potential for discovery of an undocumented pre-Columbian culture with unique burial or ceremonial practices. University administrators were skeptical, and Whitaker's formal excavation proposals were denied multiple times. Colleagues described him becoming increasingly isolated and defensive about his research. Dr. Eleanor Hammond, a fellow historian who reviewed his work, wrote in 1967, "Harold has developed an unhealthy fixation on this Miller case. What began as legitimate historical inquiry has descended into something more akin to ghost hunting than scholarship. His latest theory that the hollow somehow influenced or communicated with the Miller brothers crosses the line into pseudoscience." In response to this criticism, Whitaker wrote a lengthy defense of his work that was never published. In it, he argued, "The conventional historical approach has failed to explain the Miller disappearance and subsequent phenomena associated with the hollow. When repeated patterns emerge across decades, the abandonment of the property by multiple owners, the consistent reports of auditory phenomena, the unusual soil composition, a responsible historian must consider explanations that may initially seem unorthodox. I am not suggesting supernatural causation, but rather the possibility that the hollow contains some natural feature, perhaps a cave system with unusual acoustic properties, or geological formations that produce electromagnetic effects that influences human psychology in predictable ways." Undeterred by institutional skepticism, Whitaker continued his research independently, making weekend trips to the site and funding the work from his own modest salary. He collected soil samples, recorded ambient sounds, and attempted to map what he believed was a network of natural caves beneath the hollow, accessible through fissures in the limestone. In the winter of 1967-68, Whitaker's journals show a marked shift in tone. His entries become more urgent, less academically detached. "I had the dream again," he wrote in February 1968. "The three figures standing in the hollow, backs turned, but this time they turned to face me. Their features were indistinct, but I knew them as the Miller brothers. They spoke in unison, saying, 'We've prepared a place for you, Harold.' I woke drenched in sweat, my heart racing. What disturbs me most is not the dream itself, but my reaction to it, not fear, but a perverse sense of invitation, almost longing." In March 1968, Whitaker's entries document his discovery of what he believed to be a narrow fissure in the limestone at the center of the hollow, a fissure that had not been visible during his previous visits. "The drought has caused the soil to contract," he wrote, revealing what appears to be an opening in the bedrock. "It's too narrow for a man to enter, but by lowering a lantern on a rope, I was able to confirm that it opens into a larger space below. The depth is difficult to gauge, but the lantern remained visible for at least 30 feet of rope. I detected what seemed to be carved markings on the visible wall of the cavity, similar to those on the pottery fragments. In the spring of 1968, Whitaker obtained permission to conduct a small excavation in the hollow, presenting it to university officials as a limited geological survey rather than an archaeological dig. University records indicate he departed with 2 graduate students on April 17th. On April 19th, one student returned to campus in a state of extreme distress, unable to coherently explain what had happened. The second student and Professor Whitaker were never found. The surviving student, Martin Geller, provided a fragmented account to authorities. "We began digging at the center of the hollow where Professor Whitaker had identified an anomaly in the soil density. At approximately 7 feet down, we encountered what appeared to be a layer of ash mixed with small bone fragments, not human, possibly rodent or small birds. Beneath this was a stratum of unusually dense clay that Whitaker said wasn't native to the region. As we broke through this layer, the air changed, became heavy, like before a thunderstorm. Whitaker insisted we continue through the night using lanterns. Around midnight, we reached what felt like a void beneath, not a cave exactly, but a space. And there was sound coming from it, like breathing, but not quite. "Whitaker?" he said he needed to see. He enlarged the opening, and at this point in the interview, Geller reportedly became too agitated to continue. When pressed later, he would only add, "They were waiting for him. They've been waiting for someone who would understand, who would listen. They've been down there since 1858, maybe longer, waiting for the right person to hear them. And now they have him." A search party discovered their camp intact, meals half-eaten, equipment laid out for use. The only unusual element was a partial excavation, a pit approximately 8 feet deep in the center of the hollow. At the bottom, searchers reported finding 3 sets of footprints leading into what appeared to be a narrow tunnel or crevice in the limestone. The tunnel entrance collapsed during the investigation, allegedly due to heavy rainfall the night after its discovery. The search was called off after a week, with Whitaker and the missing student presumed dead in a cave-in. Geller was institutionalized for several months following the incident. Upon release, he refused to discuss what happened and reportedly moved to Oregon, changing his name. Before his departure, he left a sealed envelope with the university's administration with instructions that it not be opened until after his death. Martin Geller died in a car accident in 1981. The envelope contained a single page with one written sentence. "They're still down there, waiting in the hollow." Following the disappearances, the university disavowed Whitaker's research, describing it as unauthorized and outside his academic purview. His papers were archived but not published, and the incident was characterized as a tragic accident resulting from amateur spelunking rather than legitimate research. The hollow was declared dangerous due to unstable limestone formations, and the area was officially closed to the public. In 1969, a photographer for a regional travel magazine visited the site, ignoring the posted restrictions. The 3 photographs he took of the hollow never developed properly, showing only a strange, circular blur where the depression should have been. The photographer later reported experiencing unexplained equipment malfunctions whenever he approached the site, and the persistent feeling of being watched from the surrounding forest. "I've worked in remote locations all over the world," he told Professor Eleanor Hammond during her brief investigation of the Whitaker disappearance, "and I'm not easily spooked. But there was something wrong about that place, something that made my skin crawl. The air felt thicker, resistant somehow, as if the hollow was surrounded by an invisible barrier, and the silence, not just quiet, but a complete absence of sound, as if the place was somehow removed from the normal world." In 1975, the University of Missouri Archives received an unusual package from a law firm in Portland, Oregon. It contained a cassette tape labeled M. Geller, Final Testament, and instructions that it be added to the Whitaker collection. The tape remained unplayed until 1983, when Hammond, by then department chair, discovered it while organizing materials for transfer to a new facility. The recording, which runs approximately 22 minutes, begins with Geller identifying himself and stating the date, March 15, 1975. His voice is calm, measured, suggesting a man who has carefully prepared his words. "I have maintained silence about what happened in Miller's Hollow for 7 years," he begins. "I have tried to forget, to convince myself that what I experienced was the product of fear, exhaustion, and suggestion. I can no longer sustain this fiction." What follows is Geller's account of the events of April 18 and 19, 1968, delivered in the same controlled tone. He describes the excavation much as he did in his original statement, but continues past the point where he previously stopped. When Whitaker enlarged the opening, we could see that it connected to a larger chamber below. The other student, I'll call him David, was reluctant to proceed, but Whitaker was insistent. He lowered himself into the opening. We could hear him moving below, his voice echoing strangely. He called up that we should join him, that there was a larger tunnel leading deeper, that he could see light ahead. David went next. Geller pauses here, his breathing audible on the recording. I was about to follow when I heard the screaming. Not frightened screaming. It was more like ecstasy, both of them, their voices blending together. Then a third voice joined them. No, not a voice, exactly. A sound like stone grinding against stone, but with a rhythm like speech. Then silence. I called down. No response. When retrieving the lantern again, but the chamber was empty. The tunnel Whitaker had mentioned was visible, leading away into darkness. Geller describes retreating from the hollow in a state of panic, returning to camp only long enough to grab essential supplies before hiking back to the nearest road. I've told myself countless times that I should have stayed, should have tried to help them. But the truth is, I knew instinctively that they were beyond help. Not dead, something else entirely. I knew because as I fled, I heard their voices calling after me, speaking in unison, saying my name over and over. But the voices weren't coming from the hole we'd dug. They seemed to come from the ground itself, from every part of the hollow at once. The most disturbing part of Geller's testimony comes near the end of the recording. For years after, I would dream of the hollow. Always the same dream. I'm standing at the edge, looking down into the depression. At the center are three figures, their backs to me. They stand perfectly still until I speak, and then they turn, slowly. They wear the faces of Whitaker and David, but their eyes? Their eyes are wrong, empty. And the third figure wears my face. It smiles with my mouth and says, "We've kept your place, Martin. We're still waiting." I wake from these dreams with the taste of clay in my mouth and the certainty that if I ever return to that hollow, I will never leave again. The tape ends with Geller's final statement. I don't know what happened to the Miller brothers in 1858. I don't know what happened to Whitaker and David in 1968. But I know that whatever is in that hollow, whatever speaks through the ground there, it's patient. It can wait decades, centuries if necessary, for the right people to hear it. And once it has your name, it never forgets. Hammond reported that after listening to the tape, she attempted to locate Geller to verify its authenticity. She discovered that he had died in a single car accident just 2 weeks after making the recording. According to the police report, his vehicle left the road and struck a tree. There were no skid marks to indicate he had tried to brake. The responding officer noted that the crash seemed almost deliberate. The Miller property remains abandoned to this day. The state of Missouri took possession of the land in 1994 for unpaid taxes. It now sits within the boundaries of a wildlife conservation area unmarked on public maps. Local residents still avoid the hollow after dark. Rangers report that animals seem to shun the area as well. No tracks, no nests, not even insects in significant numbers. The spring, once dry, reportedly began flowing again in the 1990s, though no official testing of the water has been conducted. A conservation officer who wished to remain anonymous told a local reporter in 1997, "That place has a different feel to it. The air sits wrong. Birds won't fly directly over it. They'll go around even if it means a longer route. I've worked this land for 12 years, and I've never once seen a deer bed down within 100 yards of that hollow." In 1999, a team from the Missouri Geological Survey conducted ground-penetrating radar studies of the hollow as part of a statewide karst mapping project. Their findings, published in a technical report, note several unusual features. The depression exhibits none of the expected characteristics of a sinkhole or natural karst formation. Its symmetry suggests artificial modification, yet predates European settlement. Of particular interest is the apparent cavity detected approximately 30 feet below the surface, a chamber roughly circular in shape, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Attempts to determine the depth of this chamber were inconclusive due to signal interference. Recommendation? Further study with more sophisticated equipment. No such follow-up study was ever conducted. The lead geologist, Dr. Abigail Chen, later told a colleague that funding was denied after her preliminary report was submitted. "They said the project priorities had shifted," she reported, "but I got the distinct impression that someone higher up didn't want us poking around in that hollow anymore." In 2004, A geology student reportedly collected soil samples from the hollow as part of an independent study. According to unofficial accounts, the samples contained unusually high concentrations of iron and an unidentified organic compound. The student's work was never published, and the samples were apparently lost when a storage facility flooded in 2006. The student, now working for an environmental consulting firm in Colorado, declined to be interviewed for this report, stating only that her academic focus had shifted to less problematic research areas. In 2008, a local paranormal investigation group attempted to conduct an overnight study at the hollow. Equipped with audio recorders and infrared cameras, their permit was revoked by conservation authorities before the investigation could take place, citing ecological concerns. However, one member of the group allegedly visited the site alone and surreptitiously placed a digital audio recorder near the center of the hollow, retrieving it the next morning. The resulting audio, which circulated briefly on specialized internet forums before being removed, reportedly contained several hours of what sounded like wind, followed by a series of rhythmic impacts, described by listeners as similar to pickaxes striking soil, and low, indistinct vocalizations that some claimed resolved into English phrases when digitally enhanced. The most commonly reported phrase was "coming through," though analysts disagreed on this interpretation. The original recording has since disappeared from circulation, and the individual who placed the recorder has refused further comment on the matter. A meteorological anomaly associated with the hollow was documented by the National Weather Service in 2012. During a severe thunderstorm that caused widespread flooding in the region, weather radar showed a persistent circular area of calm directly over the hollow, a perfect eye in the storm approximately 1 mile in diameter. Local observers reported that while rain fell heavily in surrounding areas, the hollow and its immediate vicinity remained completely dry. NWS officials attributed this to an unusual air current pattern created by the topography of the hollow, though some meteorologists questioned this explanation given the relatively modest depth of the depression. In 2014, a doctoral student in archaeology, unaware of the hollow's history, selected the site for soil composition research. University records indicate that his faculty advisor attempted to dissuade him, citing previous incidents without elaboration. The student persisted, obtaining the necessary permits by describing his project as ecological rather than archaeological in nature. His field notes, preserved in university archives, document 3 weeks of increasingly strange observations. Day 1. Site is notably quieter than surrounding forest. No bird calls, insect noise minimal. Soil samples collected from 8 locations within the depression. Initial testing shows unusual mineral content, high iron oxide, trace elements not typical of the region. Day 5. Core samples from center of hollow reveal distinct stratification, unlike surrounding areas. Alternating layers of clay and what appears to be ash extending deeper than equipment can reach. No evidence of normal soil formation processes. Day 8. Audio recording equipment malfunctioning. Batteries drain within hours despite being fully charged. Noticed unusual pattern in limestone formations surrounding the hollow. When mapped from above, they appear to form 3 overlapping circles. Day 12. Excavated test pit at center of hollow. At 5 feet, encountered layer of unusual density. Material resembles clay but has textile-like structure, as if organic material has been compressed and mineralized. Taking samples for carbon dating. Day 15, dreams increasingly vivid and consistent. 3 figures standing in the hollow, always with their backs turned. The sound of digging from below. Wake with extreme thirst and taste of clay in mouth. The final entry, dated day 18, reads simply, "They're coming through." The student was reported missing the following day when he failed to check in with his department. A search found his camp intact, equipment still set up, but no sign of the researcher. The test pit he had described was located, measuring approximately 5 feet deep, but showed signs of having been deliberately filled in. His case remains open. What remains is a silence, a gap in the historical record that speaks more loudly than any documentation could. The fate of the Miller brothers remains officially unsolved. What drove them to apparent madness in those autumn days of 1858? What did they believe was emerging from the ground beneath their property? And what, if anything, did they leave buried in that hollow? The human mind, when isolated and under stress, can manufacture its own horrors. Perhaps the drought of 1858, the looming winter, and the brothers' self-imposed solitude combined to create a shared delusion. Perhaps the root cellar, with its earthen walls and natural acoustic properties, amplified normal settling sounds into what they perceived as whispers. Or perhaps, as some local legends suggest, the Millers discovered something in that hollow, something that had been buried there long before they arrived. Something that should have remained undisturbed. An intriguing side note to the Miller case emerged in 1977 when researchers at the Missouri Historical Society discovered a surveyor's report from 1820, predating settlement in the area. The surveyor, William Clark, not the famous explorer, made brief mention of a circular depression of unusual symmetry that local Native American guides refused to enter, claiming it was a thin place where the below could reach the above. Clark dismissed these claims as superstition, but noted that his compass behaved erratically near the site, making precise measurements difficult. In 1952, a folklorist named Margaret Dunbar traveled through Shannon County, collecting oral histories from elderly residents. Among her recordings, preserved in the Library of Congress, is an interview with Abigail Thornton, then 93 years old, and reportedly the granddaughter of Jacob Thornton, who had visited the Miller property shortly before the brothers' disappearance. Abigail relates a story passed down in her family. Grandfather said the oldest Miller told him they'd found something buried in the hollow when they first cleared the land, something made of stone that wasn't right. Said they should have left it be, but they got curious and dug deeper. After that, things started happening. The livestock wouldn't go near the place. Strange sounds at night. Grandfather said he warned them to leave, but the eldest Miller just smiled and said it was too late. They were already part of the agreement. When asked to elaborate on what was found, Abigail replied Grandfather wouldn't say exactly, just that it was older than Christian men and should have stayed buried. Said the Millers didn't disappear. They went somewhere else, somewhere below. This account aligns with fragmentary notes found in Whitaker's personal effects after his disappearance. On a page dated March 1967, he wrote, "Local legend suggests Miller's uncovered artifact in hollow, stone object with unusual properties. Connection to indigenous avoidance of area? Possible archaeological significance, predating known settlements. Need to investigate further." In 2016, a historian researching 19th century frontier settlements discovered an unusual document in the Missouri State Archives, a letter from the county sheriff to the territorial governor, dated spring 1859, shortly after the investigation of the Miller property. Most of the letter concerns routine matters, but a brief paragraph stands out. Regarding the Miller brothers, I must confess some disquiet about the circumstances of their disappearance. While I reported no evidence of foul play, there were aspects of the scene that defied easy explanation. The house was barred from within, yet empty of inhabitants. More troubling was what we found in the hollow nearby, a deep pit recently dug but partially filled in, as if something had emerged from it rather than been buried. Around this pit, the ground was marked with footprints leading away in all directions, yet none led back to the house or the road. It was as if multiple persons had walked away from that pit and simply vanished. I have not included these details in my official report, as they invite speculation of a sort best avoided in legal documents. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2005, when a forest ranger reported hearing male voices singing a hymn while patrolling near the hollow after dark. The ranger described the singing as coming from below ground, the voices old-fashioned and hollow-sounding. When he shone his flashlight into the hollow, the singing stopped, replaced by what he described as the sound of soil being displaced, like something pushing up from underneath. The ranger requested a transfer the following day. His report was filed but not investigated further. When interviewed for this account, he added a detail not included in his official report. The hymn they were singing, I recognized it. Shall we gather at the river? My grandfather used to sing it. But the words were different somehow. Not gather at the river, but gather in the hollow. And they sounded eager, geological. Surveys of the area conducted in 2010, as part of a broader study of the Ozark Plateau, revealed something curious about the hollow. It appears to be getting deeper. Comparison with measurements taken in the 1960s shows a depression approximately 3 feet deeper than previously recorded. Geologists attribute this to natural erosion processes, but acknowledge that the symmetry of the deepening is unusual, as if the entire hollow were sinking uniformly into the ground. Ground-penetrating radar studies were attempted in 2014 but produced inconclusive results. The equipment experienced unexplained malfunctions, and the resulting data contained what the technicians described as interference patterns that obscured whatever structures might exist below the surface. One technician noted that the patterns resembled those produced by dense concentrations of metallic ore, though no significant mineral deposits have been documented in the area. In 2018, a hiker who strayed from marked trails reported finding what appeared to be an old journal page preserved inside a weathered metal container near the edge of the hollow. The page, allegedly written in a shaky hand and dated simply October, contained a cryptic message. They speak through the soil. They offer what men desire most, knowledge beyond mortal reach. Ezekiel has already accepted. Thomas follows as always. I alone resist, but for how long? The hollow grows deeper. They come closer. We can hear them digging up toward us. The hiker claimed to have left the container where he found it, taking only a photograph of the page, which he later said was lost when his phone was damaged. Skeptics point out that many of these accounts bear the hallmarks of folklore and urban legend, stories that grow and evolve with each retelling, incorporating elements of earlier tales while adding details that reflect contemporary fears and preoccupations. The hollow, they suggest, is simply a natural geological formation that has become the focus of regional superstition, a convenient setting for cautionary tales about the dangers of isolation and the perils of disturbing the natural world. Others note the consistency of certain elements across accounts spanning more than 150 years, the whispers from below, the strange acoustic properties of the hollow, the transformative effect on those who spend time there, the recurring motif of threes, 3 brothers, 3 stone circles, 3 sets of footprints. Such consistency, they argue, suggests something beyond mere folklore. And so the Miller brothers remain, neither proven dead nor confirmed living, existing in that liminal space between history and folklore. Their fate is tied inextricably to the hollow they claimed and that perhaps ultimately claimed them. As the sun sets over the Ozark Hills and shadows lengthen across the ancient limestone, one might imagine 3 figures still digging in that isolated hollow, still preparing for an arrival that transcends ordinary understanding of time and mortality, still whispering secrets that the soil has kept for centuries. For whatever was buried in the hollow, be it truth, madness, or something altogether more unfathomable, it remains there still, separated from our world by just a few feet of Missouri clay and the fragile barrier of rational explanation. Some locals say that if you stand at the edge of the hollow on a still autumn night, when the moon is dark and the wind has died to nothing, you can hear the Miller brothers calling to each other from somewhere far below. They say the voices sound eager, excited even, like men who have discovered something wonderful and terrible and cannot wait to share it. They say the voices are still digging, still making room. And sometimes, if you listen very carefully, you might hear them speak your name, as if they've been expecting you, as if they've been waiting all this time, just for you, as if they've prepared a place for you in the hollow. A final note for those who might be tempted to seek out Miller's Hollow: the conservation area that now contains the site does not mark its location on public maps, and for good reason. The limestone formations make the terrain treacherous, with hidden sinkholes and unstable ground. Multiple visitors have required rescue after becoming lost or injured in the area. But perhaps there are other, less tangible dangers. As Samuel Miller wrote in his final journal entry, "Whatever waits in the hollow has infinite patience." It speaks to something deep in the human mind, the desire to know what lies beneath, to uncover what has been buried. But some things remain hidden for a reason. Some hollows should never be filled. For the Miller brothers, the hollow represented something different to each of them. For Ezekiel, perhaps it was revelation, answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. For Thomas, loyalty, following his brother into whatever darkness awaited. And for Samuel, reluctance giving way to inevitability, the recognition that some currents are too strong to resist. The hollow waits still, neither malevolent nor benign, but simply other, a thin place where what lies below can reach what exists above. A place where time moves differently, where whispers carry through soil and stone, where names once spoken are never forgotten. And if in your dreams you find yourself standing at the edge of a perfect circular depression, surrounded by ancient limestone and profound silence, and hear voices calling your name from somewhere deep below, remember the Miller brothers. Remember that they too once stood at the edge, listening. Remember that they too eventually answered,